Welcome back to another episode of the Kings Pulse podcast presented by the Kings Herald. My name is Brendan Nunez, and today we are joined by Samson Folk to get a Toronto Raptors perspective. The best one out there, Samson. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Not too much. I did some basketball playing today before I did some basketball reacting to the Beal trade, and now I'm doing some basketball podcasting. All the good stuff, I think. It's been
Just
good so far. Yeah.
days of basketball. It's
Yeah,
relatable.
that's
Um,
right.
And the big news that dropped today is Bradley Beal getting moved to Phoenix for Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, multiple second-round picks. Don't exactly know what that means, and pick swaps. I haven't seen clarity on that. I don't know if you have. What do you think of this deal? You tweeted that you thought that was not enough.
That kind of blew my mind. I understand. And so people responded to my tweet is like, well, I think the no trade clause played a factor. I was like, yeah, I know. I'm saying like it's couched. I'm saying, wow, this isn't a lot, even though he makes a lot of money. And even though there is a trade kicker and a no trade clause. But I was like, damn, Shamit, a perhaps soon to be waived Chris Paul and second round picks. Are you insane? That blew my mind. Because Bradley Beal, I think, is an incredibly well-suited player to play off of stars. He's tremendous, attacking the top foot on closeouts. He can make shots in the mid-range. He can get all the way to the rim. He can give you, at that point in time, like elite second side creation. And he shoots to space the floor. Of course, it's been a little bit more up and down. He had like a 30% year a couple years ago, but he shoots it. And he just seems like a guy who will fit in tremendously well and have like a little bit of a renaissance. And not to mention he shot like 50% from the field last year. And that guy is Shamit, soon to be waived Chris Paul and second round picks. That blows my mind. I mean, defense, obviously something. Hopefully he plays better defense than he has been. But like God, that's nuts to me. Crazy.
Their offense is going to be ridiculous between
Yeah.
Booker, KD, Beal. The amount of mid-range shots that are going to go down at a decent rate is going to be hilarious. Everybody but DeMar DeRozan is going to shoot more mid-range shots than those guys. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's really not much to get a talent like that. I know 3-point shooting doesn't look great, but the catch and shoot 3-point numbers are fine. I think that he's fine when it comes to spacing the floor. I don't really see why people have concerns with that. Just seeing that kind of floated around, but they're going to be ridiculously good on offense. They got to figure out the rest, but this is an appealing spot for people to go to, I think. And they have a couple free agent guys that they could think of bringing back. I'm thinking of Terrence Ross, and there's a couple in there that I can't think off the top of my mind.
Torrey
But
Craig is one of them.
that's right. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
okay, guys. And it'll be about kind of how they fill out the rest. But we've started. We've started trade season. We got a couple days until the draft, and there's no downtime between end of the season and straight into all offseason talk. And part of that includes Sacramento getting their name thrown into some things. We saw OG Anunoby being reported as somebody they're aggressively chasing, and we've heard a lot of smoke around OG for a little while. And this is kind of why I wanted to have you on and start by getting your perspective on just OG as a player and the stage in his career that he's at, how you've seen him grow and develop, and might be pretty basic from your standpoint, but I think a lot of people who watch Sacramento don't have a great perspective of OG. It's just you don't end up watching as many East Coast games. And so let's get a little bit of background on OG. 6 years in the league. He was drafted 23rd in 2017. In Sacramento, there's some guys that some people within Sac that wanted OG to be taken there. When Sac had pick 10, they traded for 15 and 20. I know some people, Bryant West, buddy of mine, that was really pushing for OG at 20. Didn't end up happening, obviously. But last year, all defensive second team for OG, led the league in steals, always been a great stocks guy. He played 67 games last year, 16.8 points, 5 boards, 2 assists, those 1.9 league leading steals, 0.7 blocks, 47% from the field, 38.7% from 3 on 5.5 a game, and 83.8% from the free throw line on 25.6 a game. So my question to you to start, Samson, after rambling off basic numbers, is when did you see OG take this jump in his game to being more than just a role player? Because you look at the basic counting stats, it looks like there's that jump right after the chip, and then Kawhi leaves. And in my mind, that means a bigger role. But is that kind of as simple as it was?
Yeah, I do think it is mostly related to that. The most successful attempt he ever had at, kind of including self-creation into that would be at the back end of the 2020-21 season, the Tampa season. And he had a very strong stretch of games where he kept up because he had always had tremendous efficiency, hanging around 60% true shooting as a guy who defends at that point in time still, an all NBA level. I know he only got the accolade this season, but he had a nice stretch where he was hitting a little bit pull up on the pull up three. He was getting to the rim and making all of his shots there. And he wasn't having some of the coordination losses as far as like losing the ball when he's attacking with a live dribble and stuff like that. And he's always made pretty good downhill reads as far as like out to the corner and laydowns. If I can ask you something, I heard paper flipping. You write the notes? You're not like a Google
I
Docs guy?
I very much write notes. I get a lot of crap. I like am at games and pull out different color pens and everything. I write notes. It's just I have a horrible memory, and I swear that this is talking about it, writing it down with a pen, typing it out is how I can actually remember all these things. So yes, paper is flipping in every episode.
I'll tell you something that surprises a lot of people because I do a reaction podcast after every game. I take no notes during the game.
Really?
None. Just vibes. And
Yeah.
so maybe I'm just lying to the people. But OG basically, I'll excite some Sacramento fans. There's like where there's smoke, there is fire. OG, I know Raptors fans have been very boisterous and loud, saying like, no, 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 none of that's true. Golden Boy loves it in Toronto. OG has been frustrated with his role, the stagnation of his role, and also a little bit like the stagnation of his game. He's had possessions, he's had stretches where he's been given opportunities, and he has voiced to the front office and to his team and everything like that, his agent, etc., that he wants more. And so some of that manifests into, well, are we looking for a place elsewhere? For a guy who has a deal looming, like an extension looming, this stuff really matters. Teams always want to maximize having guys under a certain amount of contracts. OG not getting traded at the deadline this year, I think means that he's probably, I don't know if it's going to be an extension, but I do think he probably stays with the Raptors until then. But if you're a Kings fan and you're like, does this guy even want to leave? I think that the things could fall in order for OG Anunoby to no longer be in Toronto, even if I don't think it's super likely. Just as an aside.
Oh, totally. I was gonna definitely get to that point, so I'm glad you mentioned it. Like the idea of him leaving. Obviously, there's a lot of Toronto fans that are constantly in mention saying, "Why in the world would he want to leave?" But I think what you laid out with contract situations, maybe getting to expand his game a little bit more. But I think sometimes there's some players you can hear that from, and kind of roll your eyes. Like, I don't know if this guy deserves more, but from your
Sure.
perspective of having seen it, like, what is your response to hearing that?
So as I mentioned, OG had a super promising initial jump when he got a lot of possessions at the end of the Tampa season when Pascal had a torn labrum, was out for the rest of the season, when Kyle Lowry wasn't playing that much, when it was guys like, Freddie and guys like Fred and it's just Yuta Watanabe was playing a ton of minutes. DeAndre Bembry was playing a ton of minutes. OG got possessions, and that he hasn't really replicated that. He was strong to start the 2021-22 season when Pascal was out, but a lot of that stuff it kind of correlates with his pull-up numbers. And his pull-up numbers for the first few years of his career, it went from being like 40%, 20%, 40%, 20%, and none of it on high volume. And he also has had a lot of trouble when there are multiple bodies in an action at navigating. When he's in isolation, he can get to spots, even though I'm sure Sacramento fans and Raptors fans are aware of how bad OG's isolation numbers are. But if you want him to create something and get kind of deep, he can do that in isolation. If you want him to run second side pick and roll and make reads and stuff like that, I just don't think he's shown it. And he's turned the ball over a little bit more. the passing numbers, not only on film do I find that he's not making like a ton of different reads. He's making the same simplistic reads for the most part, which is good, but it's not expansive. And the numbers are also kind of tailing off in that regard as well. So after having probably 4 or 5 stretches over the past couple seasons where he's been given a decent amount of possessions where you say, okay, you're the guy with the ball at the top of the shot clock. You get to try and create something. There's a lot of passivity there. There's a lot of inability to create there, and there's just a lack of options. So the extremely strong finish he had to finish the season was mostly as a spacer, cutter, and finisher, and that's always where he's been his strongest. He can give you, like he had a great playoff game where he created off the bounce against Philadelphia, hit a couple pull-up threes, but for the most part, I don't think it's something you expect. I don't think it's something you bet the farm on. And a guy who finishes everything at the rim, who hits his threes, who cuts really well, and is an all NBA defender is already fantastic. So whether he makes the leap or not, which I don't think he will, he's still really good. That's
I'm
my
with you.
spiel.
And let's start with that baseline because there is some of those like off the dribble moments that make you think about a higher upside, but that baseline is sort of what I think is the most appealing thing about OG in his current stage and to Sacramento specifically as somebody that as a team that runs such a free flowing offense and is really looking for play finishers, right? And having more playmaking is never a bad thing, but or shot creation to bail you out at the end of scenarios. I think we saw in the playoffs how important that is and why somebody like Malik Monk was so important for
He's
Sacramento
so good,
having another
man.
playmaker. You StreamYard has us type in names, and I did peep that you went with Malik Dunk here.
Yeah.
So shout out to you for that one. But the baseline that OG has, and I think most importantly, Sacramento obviously a great offense last year, but a lot of defensive work that is still TBD, wings forwards specifically. But to start with sort of the on ball versatility that OG has, and just from, I mean, a lot of it has to do with his length, obviously, and athleticism 6'8, 7'2, 232 is what I saw. Great athleticism laterally, that length to go with it. His most minutes he's matched up with guys throughout the league this year, and this is per NBA tracking, which has its flaws, but just to give guys an idea.
Sure.
Donovan Mitchell, Kevin Durant, DeMar DeRozan, Jaylen Brown, Jimmy Butler, Kawhi, James Harden. There's Jokic thrown in here. My question to you is how versatile do you comfortably feel with OG on ball? Like I would imagine that 2 to 4 more often than not feels okay.
1-4.
1 to
He can
4.
do
Okay, so I was going to
I
ask how much of 1 and 5 is mixed in here.
So I'll say that De'Aaron Fox, for example, is gonna get the step on OG a lot. But De'Aaron Fox gets the step on everybody.
Right.
There's games where you can watch OG as Trae Young as his primary, and those games are extremely tough for Trae Young on those possessions. The Raptors have had a lot of success running like a just pick and roll defense with having Precious Achua as the 5 and OG as the guy guarding Trae on ball. He's extremely good at using his length to give guys buffers, knowing he can close the space. He is tremendous on 2s and 3s. He can guard a lot of star ones. Now there's some guys who are obviously going to, these are stars who are the best players on ball. The 5, I think there's a misnomer. Raptors fans always think he can guard 5s. Nobody can really guard 5s. The Raptors, when they guard Jokic, I know there's those numbers. A lot of what they're doing is putting OG on Jokic because he's extremely brutally strong to hold position and then hanging a guy in the gap to make sure that there are no entry passes. Typically, maybe Pascal, maybe Scotty Barnes, guys with length who can jump lob passes in. And also having OG as a hawk when the Nuggets eventually move away from the entry pass and try to initiate with Jokic above the break. There's like a 7 steal game in there where he's being particularly annoying. Those are kind of like schematic wrinkle 5 matchups. Those aren't really true, go to the wheelhouse with another center. That's not something he has a lot of success with. But I do think ones, a lot of the time, you're going to find OG has a ton of success guarding guys like that. Yeah.
And I think that's something Sacramento could obviously use. Davion Mitchell is talented in that aspect, but as we get to potential trades here eventually, I think that there's a chance Davion's a part of this, but also just Davion in his current stage does not have the shooting to play alongside De'Aaron Fox. And I've come to realize that I also should probably alter this wording, that if to include that if De'Aaron became a better shooter, that also would unlock Davion. Like
Sure.
there's a reason why it's Davion needs to play with De'Aaron rather than vice versa, but there is a way that De'Aaron could also help Davion succeed more alongside him offensively. But that on-ball defense is something Sacramento desperately needs. The flexibility to be able to move him around to different matchups, I think, is really impressive, and something that they lack currently. I'm sure they want to try and work Keegan into this stuff, like you see him matched up with Anthony Edwards or a Devin Booker, but that's really not. I mean, it didn't go great in year one, and I don't think you expect it to go great in year one, but I don't know that's something he projected to do coming into the NBA necessarily anyways. So having a guy like OG to do that would be really impressive. What do you think of his, when he is guarding these ones, his screen navigation? That's one thing where I think Davion is really impressive defensively. He's maybe not great in getting around screens. Where do you feel like OG is at with that?
So if you're running, this is something the Raptors do, is a lot of times they'll use Pascal to chase shooters because Pascal's really slinky and can cover a lot of ground the same way that OG does. But OG, if he's on ball, like he's not typically a stab step lock and trail type of guy. The Raptors will ice a lot so that OG can stay in kind of like that single coverage and use his length to catch up if they do try and take the straight line drive. Kind of saddle them until they get to maybe 16 or 17 feet on the baseline or something like that. And then that length is super important. He steps through screens, like he leads with the shoulder, he gets the arm, and he pulls himself through a lot of the time. He is very impressive when doing it, but every once in a while, if there's like a really good screener on the other end, you can get caught. And the screen navigation, as far as, I wouldn't put him on Curry, if there's another Kings Warriors thing that happens with that. But I wouldn't have him sprinting around the court or anything like that. But as far as pick and roll possession screen navigation, really strong, because he can inform how the ball handler, because his defense is so smothering, he can inform how the ball handler takes the screen and then handle the screen at the point of contact there. But as far as being run around, like guarding a really agile one, that would be probably pretty tough, I think.
Understandably.
Yeah. Big
And
guy.
yeah, that's a tough ask for sure. But I think the on-ball pick and roll getting through screens is encouraging. And Sacramento did a lot of the same of a no middle icing defense. So fits into that. How do you feel about him off ball comparatively? Like, do you feel like that you are not getting the most out of OG defensively if you're not assigning him to some of these on ball creators and do his work on ball? Or how do you feel about comparing the two there?
So he's really strong above the break off ball. Like that's OG. That's where a lot of his steals come, is either at the nail or the wing to point or point to wing passes. And God, I feel like it's probably like a 9-to-1 ratio as far as like success versus missing something. So most guys operate closer at like 2-to-1, 3-to-1 if they're going for it. It's like preternatural the way that he's able to do it. Off ball, he's extremely capable as a guy who defends at the nail, like the strip, or when a guy picks up the dribble and is on his last step and is looking for that bailout. The guy at the nail gets big and covers a lot of ground, and you try and get that steal. He's really great there. Weak side zone, he's pretty capable because he's long. He tracks passes well, and he can also pinch in for that secondary rim help, which he also is way above average for as far as wing players. And he's also like a banger around the glass. So not in the traditional rebounding numbers, but he can go compete for some. So I think he's like, that's the thing about OG, is he's not the best guy at being that mirror on ball. He's not like Paul George in 2017 with, the Thunder, or 2018 off ball. but he's like a facsimile of the best guys at each thing and does like a really impressive job at that. So um, he's very good off ball, but there's a reason that you're going to put him on the best offensive initiators and players. And it's because other guys find it easier to compete off ball. So yeah, he'll be fine doing either, I'm sure. But you'd probably see him on a lot of guys if he were on the Kings.
Yeah, especially in from Sacramento's perspective, and you mentioned him being going back to some of the offense, like the catch and shoot 3-point shooting was 40% last year, and he's been a good 3-point shooter. Just statistically, his finishing at the rim, according to Cleaning the Glass, was 65%. I think he would get that number would look even higher in Sacramento's offense, just with being able to take advantage of back cuts, his athleticism, his finishing at the rim. When he gets easier looks and just guys are half a second too late, I think that number would be even better. I think offensively that he is, and defensively that he's a really great fit for Sacramento. Like, do you have a a perspective on that of sort of how he would fit, and specifically, like, they admittedly would kind of be looking at him as not the only way that you get better defensively, but he's, if they were to make some sort of deal, the idea would be that he's the core piece that's changing your defense and everybody else sort of rides with him, but that he'd be the engine to that.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about, I know there are in the dialogue or in the discourse, people feel like OG isn't as good as his reputation because there's a lot of hubbub about him being wanted by so many teams and having a high price. And, that's the result of him having a perfectly, like, his game fits anywhere, really. It's a guy who shoots threes, is a willing cutter, finishes, a high percentage of looks at the rim, and defends his ass off or butt off. Whatever the case is over here with
You're
the
good.
cursing. Um, Anything like that, the guy's just gonna fit really well. As long as OG doesn't have giant designs of like, I need this many possessions, give me the ball doing this, all that kind of stuff to maybe lower efficiency on the offensive end. But um, Kings fans, why wouldn't you want that guy? You know what I mean? Why wouldn't Portland want him? Why didn't the Nets want him? Why whoever wants OG, like you understand it. You're not losing anything anywhere relative to other wing players unless it's a star, like an initiator at the point of attack. So yeah, I mean, I loved the Kings last year. Malik Monk, it's Malik Dunk because I wanted Malik Monk on that MLE, man. I wanted it in Toronto so bad, and he's so good. And De'Aaron Fox, a lefty, explosive. I fashioned myself as one of those. He's great too. Sabonis, I love Caitlin Cooper's work, so I became very familiar with his game. In Indiana, Keegan Murray, super compelling as a rookie. They just, like, even Kevin Herter, man, like, what was he, like, 62% true shooting or something during the regular season? It
Yeah.
was absurd. They had everything going. They play this beautiful egalitarian offense, and then you get to stick a guy like OG in it on both sides. Yeah, of course.
I'm
It
with
makes
you.
sense to me.
To me too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Final questions before we get to hypothetical packages. Um, is that he has 1 year left before a player option. This year is going to be 18.6 million. Next year, 19.9 million. Expected to turn that down, right?
He's not
Right.
taking that.
I
He
figured,
could
just
he
making
could tear
sure.
his ACL and his Achilles, and he would
It wouldn't make
still
sense.
probably not take that. Yeah.
Right. And you, jokingly mentioned the injuries, but I do want to get your
Ooh.
perspective on some injuries with OG. 67 games last year, but 48 in the year prior, 43 prior to that. And then you go 69, 67, 74. But that is something often brought up because if you were getting OG, you would ideally want to have some
Yes.
sort of extension agreed upon as well, where you'd be able to keep him around for a while. But injury concerns lie there. So my two final points of concern to get your insight on are, how do you feel? What sort of faith do you have in him remaining healthy? And what sort of number do you expect him to be in the range of when free agency comes up?
So I think that some of this is terrible luck. Like, he got poked in the eye. He's missed, I think, in his career like 15 games from being poked in the eye.
I was looking at it. There was eyes. There's a fractured finger that like kept
Yeah,
getting delayed. A hip pointer. It
yeah.
was a bunch of random stuff.
So the good news is that none of this stuff seems to be connected. And a lot of it seems to be like, when you're playing pickup and you get a jammed finger or something like that, or somebody's hand goes somewhere. It seems to be like just bad luck, not, the slow decay of the human body, which happens to a lot of guys. There's no indication of that. But the honest to God truth is that OG is kind of, when he gets on offense trying to get downhill sometimes, like he's in the messy parts of the court. He I don't know how or why, is a guy who keeps getting, like, the little nicks and knacks and all that kinda stuff, and so there's nothing serious there, but he does seem like a guy. I feel pretty confident you're gonna get over 60 games, like, if you trade for him and then he signs an extension, like 4 years or something like that, I think over those 4 years, you're gonna have an average of 60 games played per, if I had to guess, but, he's gonna miss some games. The and to his credit, though, I know Nick Nurse, there were, like, floaters in the media that he thought that OG didn't play hurt, which I don't think is true. OG played with a broken hand for, like, 15 games last year, so, he's a tough cookie, and he's had some bad luck. I think he'll give you a decent amount of games played, but there's always something with him, and it could be frustrating, but as long as you just are like, I guess a guy gets poked in the eye every once in a while, you can make peace with it.
Which happens.
Yeah,
Rashawn had this, it may have been 2 years ago now at this point, but yeah, I mean, it happens at times, and when he's on, as long as he's healthy for playoffs and the
sure.
contribution that he's able to provide to Sacramento, I think makes a lot of sense. So if we're getting to a hypothetical trade conversation between Sacramento and Toronto here, and it starts with Keegan Murray not being available, is that fine and expected on your end?
So I thought that was surprising. Now, I don't know if people there was like that report today that it was like people are finding the Raptors front office frustrating to deal with, which is a funny report. I don't expect any front office to be easy to like
Right.
trade with, but I will say that most fan bases overrate their players. I will do my best not to be some sort of raging homer as far as this conversation goes, but I was surprised and probably thinking in my mind, it's very tough to see a framework for the Kings to get OG without including Keegan. Like it seems tough to get there. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, what do you think it would be? I mean, if it was Keegan, then that's just the primary return we're talking about, right? I
Yeah,
don't know if salary wise, if you still have to probably throw like, I mean, if you could throw Rashawn in there, which we're gonna have to have a conversation about Rashawn in this process, but it wouldn't if Keegan was involved. Okay, so let me ask you this first, from
sure.
your perspective, how much what do you think of that deal from Sacramento's perspective, giving up Keegan for OG? We talked about really liking the fit, but do you feel like that is too short-sighted and too like all in right now? I know you would ideally get to be able to extend OG, but obviously longer team control. You'd have optionality with Keegan. It almost, from my perspective, feels too right now. And I will admit it, before Keegan's first year, I'm pretty sure I had people ask me, and I'm like, yeah, of course I'd put him for OG. And I changed my tune a little bit after seeing
Sure.
that year one.
Yeah, I think like it's all about roster construction because OG is probably, in terms of impact, will keep returning like closer to, a top 40, top 50 player, just because of the defense. And, maybe a really good year from three. Maybe he gets closer to like top 35 in terms of, the catch alls and stuff like that. There's been Raptors players who've been, overrated by those in the past, though. And Keegan is by no means guaranteed to reach that, but I'm doing a piece on the 2013 Raptors and how they turned it around. And Kyle Lowry was like, 15 and then 14 and then 12% of the cap as that team became really good. And so there's the roster construction stuff. There's no guarantee that Keegan will be as good as OG, but there is a guarantee that he will be very good, very easy to play with, and very cheap for however many of the next years. And like I couldn't say that's a tough trade-off.
It
But
is.
obviously, if we're doing like the game where like you're Sacramento and I'm the Raptors, and you say we're not doing Keegan, I say, well, you are if you want OG, and like maybe the conversation dies. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know really. What are the counters? Like what else are you compiling to get OG out of Toronto? What's that look like?
And this is where we get to Rashawn probably having to be the matching salary.
Yep.
And Rashawn has 2 years, 25 million remaining. I think he's been linked to Toronto before when he was in free agency and the year leading up to free agency. And there were that was a weird free agency, the way his agency went about that eventually got fired and he moved on to an additional one. I still think Rashawn,
believe it, man.
it
Oh,
was weird. It was weird. I think that they thought they were going to get a way higher number than they did and scared people away. Excuse me, saying the things they said, and still ended up somehow with a deal that now we look back on and it's like, oh, well, this is a dump. You got to dump this deal, I guess. But I still think there's a player in there with Rashawn. 2 years, 25 million remaining. I'm sure he's going to take that player option in the second year of that. But from Toronto's perspective, you see Rashawn involved, and it's like, okay, well, that takes even more assets for me to take on that deal. I'd take it. And then the other two things you throw in, the immediate standouts are Davion Mitchell, who I think from Sacramento's perspective, I think there's a case to be made that he might not be able to reach the best version of himself in Sacramento anyways. If you think that there's starter potential there, which I think is the question, and I may not believe, but I think there's something interesting with Davion. There's pick 24, and then how many future first-round picks do we have to talk about?
Yeah. So the Raptors were trying to get 3. They got offered 3 from New York, although they weren't the highest quality first-round picks. And then any other conversation around OG has been kind of, I think, the platonic ideal of his worth around the league is not the 3rd overall pick that the Raptors wanted to draft LaMelo with. It isn't the 7th overall pick that, Benedict Mathurin went for. But I think a lot of teams are like, if we could trade the 10th or the 11th pick for OG, that would just be perfect. And the Raptors are like, that's not going to be enough. And I don't know, because the Kings would be very good if they got OG. Like, they're a buzzsaw already. You guys are going to win a lot of games next year, I suspect. And if OG was there, you'd win more games and probably pay him to keep him. And then you guys would win a lot of games over the next few years. I don't expect that the first-round picks would be super valuable. But I don't know.
Well,
It seems
they'd
like
have to be a little out. So they owe 1 to 20 in 24 to Atlanta, which if
right.
they remove the restrictions on that, which they believe they can do pretty easily, it would make sense. They could just tell Atlanta we're going to remove fully restrictions on that. So say it was pick 24 in this draft and then 2026 and 2028 first. If we could go top 4 protections, sort of, or if those need to be taken off, then maybe that's a conversation.
Rashawn, Davion, and 3 firsts.
Yeah, one of them being 24 in this draft.
That probably moves people. I can't say yes or no to any. Like it doesn't matter if I say yes or no to anything. But that probably gets people moving and considering things. If I had to guess,
I would think the same. And then my follow up to you would be, what other teams stand out to you as potential landing spots? Indiana's been floated around a lot. They have number 7 once again. Memphis has been floated around, but is there other packages that stand out to you? Because, it's fun to talk about like just between Sacramento and Toronto conversations, but reality is that you're bidding against other teams in the league as well.
Yeah. New York still wants him. Memphis still wants him. Indiana still wants him. He's one, especially those teams that like they have that hole on the wing and they're like, man, we have like these teams, all of them have these pretty great lead guards and they have like intriguing front court guys. And, Jaren Jackson being like way more than intriguing and Miles Turner being more than intriguing. Julius Randle was a lot better last year than I think he's just better than most people think. These guys are good. They just need a guy in the wing. I think that go
With
ahead.
those sort of deals, though, is there any like standout return piece to you?
I'd imagine Raptors fans and the front office would be like Seven and Healed is really nice, if I had to guess. And Seven and Healed, I would imagine, is probably looked more fondly upon by the organization as well. But Seven and Healed, maybe like the Pacers, like there's no way you're getting Seven and Healed.
Right.
So, everybody's greedy all the time, trying to get the best thing.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty greedy from Sacramento's perspective for OG.
Sure.
I love the idea of this fit. If I will say on the Keegan stuff, like it was reported that he won't be discussed in any of these deals. I'm sure it doesn't take long to think back of Tyrese Halliburton not being discussed in any deals, and shit changes fast. So you never know. I would talk myself into it. I would be shocked, but I would talk myself into it, and I would do everything I can to make it work with a Davion Keegan, or I'm sorry, Davion or Sean Ohms and future first we're talking about. But before I started recording here with you, you asked me if we were going to talk about OG and Siakam.
Sure.
And obviously, I fully plan to only talk about OG here. And I think there was a time last offseason I had you on to talk about Siakam, and then made me feel like, damn, maybe I should have talked about OG more. And now we're sitting here in the opposite shoes. But do you think that Siakam should be talked about more from other teams' perspectives as somebody to look at?
Siakam is a guy who he could be the piece that puts a team in a relatively flat NBA. The right team gets Pascal. That could be what swings it for them. He wasn't all NBA this year, but he's giving you roughly all NBA stuff for like 3 years, 4 years. That's a really good player in the NBA. The wing position for all NBA selections has been a little bit weaker than in, maybe the front half of the decade, but still really impressive. That's a guy who, if the Kings were like, hey, we're not including Keegan, I just don't even think there's a phone call then.
Right.
It's tough to construct a trade where Siakam ends up in Sacramento, I think. But it would be pretty cool. Sacramento just plays great basketball, man. Like a lot of players will be super cool there. You guys are in a good spot. I like the team a lot.
What a time to be alive, man. What a time. Like being rumored to be a part of one of the teams Bradley Beal would waive his no trade clause for. I don't think that it necessarily got close to him coming to Sacramento, but that is just an encouraging thing, man. When's the last time you've seen something like that? It's been a while.
Did you guys have any commenters who were like, hey, like Malik Monk is better than Bradley Beal? Like, it's fine.
People weren't too hot on the Bradley Beal idea, so I bet you there were some out there. Sounds like you're looking for them, though. We'll find you the right people. We'll find you the right people. My other question to you before we get you out of here, Samson, is the coaching search. I want to touch on real quick. And Toronto ended up making their decision, did not go with Jordy Fernandez. But what was the perspective on Jordy from people in Toronto throughout that whole process?
So I talked to Masai the other day, and he said they interviewed 15 guys. He talked about Sergio Scariolo as, a favorite. Kenny Atkinson was a favorite. Masai and Kenny are very close. They even just as not colleagues, but they spend time together. They're pals. Jordy was not mentioned as one, although the fan base was very interested in Jordy Fernandez. A lot of people loved Jordy, and there's testimonials from people around the league who love Jordy. And when I said, hey, I'd really like Jordy, there's a few Kings fans and Kings, writers who were like, hey, what do you think you're doing over there trying to take our guy?
Yeah.
So having people want your assistant coaches is a good thing. Now, the Raptors, it didn't turn out as good for them. It turns out that, their head coach and assistant coaches were perhaps not deplorable people, but they were a little bit cancerous to organizations, if we're talking about Nick and Nate Bjorkgren, etc. But having people want your assistant coaches is awesome. And Jordy, I hope that he gets a head coaching job somewhere someday. It didn't end up being in Toronto. And Darko seems really great. I've talked to him. He offered to do X's and O's with me, so he's actually the greatest coach of all time, in my opinion. And but yeah, Jordy was great. Everything I looked into regarding him, I thought was just everything that came back was awesome. So hell yeah to him in Sacramento still.
Yeah, Jordy is one of the nicest people to talk to. Super willing to take a little bit of time and talk to whoever. I'm sure he'll eventually get another opportunity. This wasn't the first time that he's interviewed for a head coaching job. I know the Atlanta job. I think there was previous openings. I want to say the Washington he interviewed for as well a couple years back. So I'm sure he'll end up getting another opportunity, and it's well deserved. I'm sure eventually we'll see that for Jordy. But I
Yeah.
think that's all I got for you, Samson. I can't say how much I appreciate you coming on, man, and sharing your perspective.
Yeah, I'll sign off by saying, who knows? Maybe Jordy didn't want the Toronto job because he wanted to stay in Sacramento with all you fine people. Maybe that's the sign off.
That's got to be it. Got to be it. But Samson Folk, everybody, definitely check out his work and check out all the great work as well at the Kings Herald from myself and the other guys at Gals, and take a look at their Patreon to support local independent Kings coverage. And if you enjoyed this episode of the Kings Bulls podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. And you'll hear from me again next couple days.